I wish I had never handed my house over to the devil. And that devil wasn't a stranger. It was my own daughter-in-law. She promised to take care of my home while I was away. Spoke so sweetly that I believed every word. But the moment I turned my back, the security cameras captured something so horrifying, so unforgivable, that I still can't erase it from my mind. Since the day I checked that footage, I haven't been able to sleep. Every night I count the days until I can return to my beloved home, the place where the innocent creatures I raised are crying for help in silence. To uncover the full story, stay with me until the end of this video. And please let me know in the comments, where are you listening from? Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video to help me tell the truth. I opened my laptop that evening only to check on my poodle. The hotel room in Portland was quiet, the rain tapping gently against the window. I had been gone for 2 days on a short trip, and before leaving, I'd asked my daughter-in-law Natalie to stop by the house once a day to feed the dog and water the plants. That was all, nothing more. But when the home camera loaded, my breath caught. The living room wasn't calm or empty. It was full, too full. Balloons floated near the ceiling, streamers glimmered under bright lights, and loud pop music shook the speakers. Strangers I had never seen before walked across my rug holding champagne glasses. For a second, I thought it was some kind of glitch. But then I saw my own kitchen, the marble countertop, the blue vase I brought from Italy, the family portrait hanging near the dining area. It was my home, unmistakably mine. A voice echoed from the kitchen, cheerful and sharp. "Surprise gender reveal!" The crowd screamed in excitement. Someone popped a confetti cannon, and pink dust filled the air. My hand trembled on the mouse. I zoomed the camera closer. There she was, Natalie Pierce, standing proudly in the middle of the chaos, wearing a silky pink dress as if she were hosting a gala. My poodle barked frantically from his crate, while guests stepped around him like he was invisible. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I had trusted her with my keys, with my home. I'd told her, just make sure the dog's fed and the plants don't dry out. Not once did she ask to host a party, and yet there she was, turning my kitchen into her stage. The laughter through the speakers sounded hollow, almost cruel. My hands curled into fists. That chandelier above the table, my husband installed it himself, the year before he passed. I remembered how proud he had been. Seeing it now swinging under the noise of strangers felt like watching him be disrespected all over again. I whispered into the quiet hotel room. She used my house for this. No one could hear me, but something inside shifted. This wasn't a mistake. It was entitlement. I closed the laptop, slowly breathing through the ache in my chest. My heart was pounding, but my mind had already begun to steady. If Natalie thought I was too old to fight back, too gentle to act, she was about to learn how fiercely a woman protects what's hers. The camera feed sharpened, and for a moment, I wished it hadn't. Every inch of my living room looked like a battlefield after a storm of glitter and noise. My cream-colored sofa, the one I'd saved up to buy after my husband passed, was soaked in champagne. The wall behind it was smeared with streaks of red wine. Children were jumping on the coffee table, laughing their shoes, crushing pieces of cake that had fallen from a ruined dessert. The thick ivory rug I brought from Vermont was now a sticky mess of frosting and footprints. Neon party lights blinked wildly, washing the room in pink and blue flashes. Their reflection hit the family photos hanging on the wall. I could barely see my late husband's face, his smile once so steady and kind, now hidden behind floating balloons that read, "Boy or girl." My chest tightened as if someone had placed a heavy stone there. That photo had stayed untouched for years. Even when I dusted it, I used my hands gently, as though I could still feel him through the glass. Then something moved in the corner of the screen and my stomach turned. The fish tank. The blue LED lights flickered, showing silhouettes of people crowding around it. One man leaned forward and dipped his hand into the water, laughing as my koi darted away in panic. That koi had been with me for 7 years. It was the only living thing that had shared every quiet morning since my husband's funeral, and now someone was treating it like a toy. I felt my heart hammer in my chest, each beat sharper than the last. My palms went cold. This wasn't just a party, it was desecration. Every space in that house had meaning. Every picture, every chair, every petal in the vase carried memory. And now strangers were trampling through it as if it were nothing. A wave of nausea rose. I pressed a hand to my mouth, staring at the chaos in disbelief. I could almost smell the spilled alcohol through the screen, hear the careless laughter echoing off my walls. My throat burned with anger. In that instant, I didn't see a home anymore. I saw a violation, an invasion. Something sacred had been broken, and no apology could ever fix it. For people like Natalie, a house was just a place to show off. For me, it was my last connection to love, to order, to dignity. Watching it turned into a playground for strangers made something deep inside me harden. That was when the anger settled, not loud, not wild, but quiet and cold. The kind that doesn't fade. The kind that plans. The sound came through the speaker so clearly that it felt like the voice was right behind me. The camera's built-in microphone had always been useful for catching the poodles barking or the sound of the mailman at the door, but this time it caught something else. Natalie's voice. "Finally, she's gone on her little trip," she said, laughing. "This party's so much better without that old woman around. All I need from her is money for this baby anyway." I froze. My hand stopped halfway to the laptop. Then came another voice, her mother's, dry and amused. "Well, she's rich enough. Make her feel needed. You'll get more that way." For a moment, everything in me went silent. The hum of the air conditioner disappeared. The rain outside seemed to stop. My heart didn't know whether to break or to burn. I stood up slowly, pushing the chair back, but my legs felt weak. I had let this girl into my home, cooked for her, shared my husband's recipes, listened when she cried over her bills. She had called me Mom, hugged me at Christmas, smiled when I bought her maternity clothes. And now to her I was nothing but a wallet, an obstacle, a nuisance to be tolerated. The words echoed in my head like a sentence handed down in court. That old woman. All I need is her money. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady my breathing. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic, it was quiet, sharp, and final. Then reason cut through the pain. The microphone. The recording. Under U.S. law, audio captured by a home security system inside one's own property is admissible evidence. This wasn't gossip or misunderstanding. It was proof. Her words were real, and they belonged to me now. I sat back down, opened the app's archive, and downloaded the file to my desktop. The small red light blinked in the corner of the screen. Saved. For the first time that night, I didn't feel powerless. The same woman they mocked for being too old had just become their biggest threat. My heart still ached, but beneath the hurt was something solid: clarity. I wasn't just a mother betrayed anymore. I was a victim with evidence, and that made me dangerous. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just sat there staring at the screen, frozen in place, as if my body had forgotten how to move. The shock didn't come all at once. It spread slowly like cold water seeping into my bones. My breath came shallow, my fingers numb against the edge of the laptop. The laughter from the party continued through the speakers, muffled, now distant, like the world on the other side of a wall I could no longer reach. For a long moment, I simply watched. My reflection hovered faintly on the dark frame of the screen. Gray hair, tired eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. Somewhere in me, a voice whispered, what every American senior is taught after a lifetime of hard lessons: Keep calm and gather proof. Don't shout. Don't act in anger. Just prepare. So I did. I moved slowly, deliberately. I opened the security app again and navigated to the archive section. My hands were trembling, but I clicked every file one by one and downloaded them to my computer. I even copied them to a separate drive just in case. I wasn't going to let Natalie's laughter erase what she had done. Each clip was a wound I couldn't look away from my home. My memories turned into someone else's playground. The camera timestamp blinked in the corner, 7:42 p.m. I whispered it under my breath, memorizing it like a date of betrayal. My heart throbbed painfully in my chest. I thought of the dinners we'd shared, of the times she'd smiled and said, "Mom, you don't need to worry about anything." And I had believed her. Foolishly. Now, beneath the grief, another feeling stirred, sharp calculating. If she could do this while I was away, what else had she done while I was home? What documents had she touched? What conversations had she overheard? How deep did this go? The numbness began to fade, replaced by focus. I minimized the video window and opened a folder to store the evidence. I named it simply Home Recordings. The act of labeling it steadied me. My breathing evened out. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, my resolve hardened. I looked at the screen one last time. Natalie was still laughing, surrounded by people who didn't know or didn't care that they were standing in someone else's life. I closed the laptop gently and whispered to myself, "All right. Let's see what else you've been hiding." I stared at the screen, unable to look away. Natalie was raising a glass of champagne, laughing with her head thrown back, surrounded by strangers who cheered as if they belonged there. The neon lights caught her smile, the kind of smile only people who think they've gotten away with something can wear. That wasn't joy. That was triumph. The grin of someone who had taken what wasn't hers and believed no one would ever call her out for it. My fingers curled around the edge of the laptop. For a second, I could almost feel the softness of that living room carpet under my feet, smell the faint trace of my husband's cologne still lingering in the hallway. That house had been built on decades of hard work, trust, and love. And tonight, it stood as a stage for betrayal. A whisper escaped my lips, so soft it surprised even me. I raised a devil under my own roof without knowing it. The words hung in the air like smoke. Outside, the rain had grown heavier, tapping against the window pane with a rhythm that sounded like warning knocks. The wind pushed through the pine trees beyond the parking lot, making them sway and hiss. The night seemed to listen, as if nature itself knew what kind of storm had begun inside me. I closed the laptop slowly, the reflection of her smiling face fading into darkness. The silence that followed was thick, but not empty. It carried purpose. I reached for the porcelain teapot on the tray beside me and poured a cup of tea. The liquid was cold, untouched since earlier, but I lifted it anyway. The bitterness steadied me. The woman in the window's reflection didn't look broken. She looked awake. The fog that had clouded my mind for months, grief, loneliness, misplaced trust, was gone. What replaced it was something clear and sharp, like glass, catching the first light of dawn. I had spent my life believing kindness could fix anything, that patience was strength. But tonight, I learned something new. Some battles require steel, not softness. Some betrayals demand answers, not forgiveness. The rain outside drummed harder, as if echoing my heartbeat. I whispered again, this time with certainty. "You took advantage of the wrong woman." Then I blew gently across the surface of the tea and took a sip. It tasted of metal and calm, the kind of calm that comes before a plan. I've lived alone for 12 years now, in the same cedar house my husband and I bought when we first moved to Oregon. The house sits on a gentle hill, surrounded by pine trees and lavender bushes that perfume the air every morning. The smell mixes with damp soil and coffee, Two things that have marked the rhythm of my days since he passed. My life is quiet, but it's mine. Every morning, I wake up at 6, feed my poodle, and water the small vegetable garden behind the porch. There's a pond by the fence with 2 koi fish that have survived longer than most of my neighbors' marriages. I keep the porch swept, the mailbox polished, and the curtains tied just right so the sunlight lands on the photo of my husband that hangs above the fireplace. People say I keep things too neat, but order gives me peace. I worked for the U.S. Postal Service for 40 years. Back then, I knew every street in town, every family's name. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, steady, and built on trust. After retiring, I received a comfortable pension, along with small returns from stocks my husband had bought long ago. I never became rich, but I've never had to ask anyone for help either. Independence, that's something you learn to protect as you grow older in this country. My neighbors often stop by with baked bread or garden tools to borrow. They call me the soul of the old district, and sometimes I laugh, saying, that's just a fancy way of saying I don't move much. But deep down, I'm proud. This little corner of Oregon feels like a heartbeat that refuses to fade with time. After my husband died, the house became more than just a place to live. It became memory made solid. His old typewriter still sits on the desk by the window. The rocking chair he built creaks softly when the wind blows through the screen door. Even the chipped ceramic mug on the shelf feels sacred. Some evenings, I sit by the pond with a cup of tea, listening to the water ripple against the stones. The silence doesn't feel lonely. It feels earned. Every sound, the wind, the pine needles, the birds, belongs to the life we built together. I thought I had found balance, that peace was something I could finally trust. But I was wrong. Because even the most careful life can be invaded when you let the wrong person hold your keys. My son Mason is 35 now, a quiet, polite man who works in an insurance office downtown. He's the kind of son people envy. Steady job, clean haircut, no drama. When he married Natalie Pierce 5 years ago, I tried to convince myself it was a good match. She was cheerful, talkative, full of energy. A bit too obsessed with her phone and designer handbags, but in today's world, who isn't? They live just a few miles from my house, renting a small apartment near the highway. Every Sunday, without fail, they come by for dinner. Mason usually sits at the kitchen counter scrolling through his phone while I cook. Natalie helps in her own way. She takes photos of the table, the food, even the steam rising from the soup, then posts them online with captions like, "Family loves Sunday comfort." She always tilts her head toward me when taking selfies, calling out "Smile Mom." To the neighbors, we look like a perfect American family, 3 generations connected, warm, grateful. People often say, "You're lucky, Emma. Your kids still come home every week." And I smile because that's what's expected of me. Sometimes they take leftovers, home containers of stew, roasted chicken, bread rolls. Natalie always thanks me sweetly, but I notice how her eyes linger on the pantry or the fridge before she asks, "Mind if I take a little more?" I always say yes. That's what mothers do, right? We give even when no one remembers the giving. Mason means well, I think. He was a good boy, always respectful. But since the wedding, something in him has shifted, subtle but real. He speaks less, defers more to her. And when I bring up simple things like his father's old watch or family savings, he changes the subject quickly, as if money is a sensitive topic he can't touch. Still, I tell myself not to complain. They're young. Life is expensive. And if sharing a few groceries or helping with bills keeps peace in the family, then that's a small price to pay for love. At least that's what I used to believe. Because no matter how many times I told myself I was just being generous, deep down, I sometimes felt invisible, useful, but unseen. They smiled, hugged me, called me mom, but rarely asked how I was or stayed long enough for coffee after dinner. Yet every Sunday night when I watched their car disappear down the road, a part of me felt content. I'd whisper quietly to myself, At least my son still comes home for dinner. I held on to that thought like a fragile blessing, never realizing how quickly even that could be taken away. It started subtly, like most things that go wrong do. One evening after dinner, as we sat around the kitchen table with the scent of roasted chicken still lingering in the air, Natalie sighed dramatically and placed a hand on her small belly. "Strollers are so expensive these days," she began, her tone light but deliberate. "And then there's the crib, the diapers, baby formula, health insurance." Her voice trailed off just long enough for the silence to do its work. Mason nodded beside her, not adding much, just enough to seem supportive. "Yeah, everything costs more than we thought," he murmured. He didn't look at me, only at the table, as if guilt was something he could avoid by keeping his eyes down. I folded the napkin in my lap, slowly pretending not to feel the shift in the air. For a moment, I saw them not as my son and his wife, but as two people calculating what I might give. I told myself I was imagining it. Every mother worries too much. Still, the guilt crept in like a draft under the door. They were starting a family. I was comfortable. Helping was what a good parent did. The next morning, I went to the Wells Fargo branch downtown. The teller recognized me. She'd seen me for years depositing pension checks and dividends. I withdrew $10,000 from my savings. The bills were crisp, wrapped neatly in a brown envelope. When I handed it to Mason later that afternoon, I said softly, "This is for the baby. Don't be careless with it." He smiled in that boyish way he used to when asking for gas money in college. "Thanks, Mom. We'll be careful." Natalie leaned forward, clasping my hands with her manicured fingers, eyes wide with practiced gratitude. "You're the best, Mom. Really." I smiled too, though my chest felt tight. They left soon after, laughing as they walked to the car, the envelope tucked safely in Mason's jacket pocket. Through the window I watched them go, their figures shrinking into the twilight. Something in me ached, not just from giving, but from not knowing what exactly I had given away. As I cleared the dishes, their laughter still echoed faintly in my ears. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, but beneath the warmth of pride, a thin, cold thread began to form a whisper that asked whether love should ever feel like obligation. That night, as I turned off the kitchen light, I realized something unsettling. I couldn't tell where generosity ended and being used began. At first, it all looked so perfect, almost too perfect. Natalie began showing up at my house more often, carrying grocery bags or bouquets of tulips wrapped in brown paper. "Just thought these would brighten the place up," she'd say, with a dazzling smile. On weekends, she'd insist on helping me clean. She'd post photos afterward. My table neatly set, my silverware glinting in the afternoon light, with captions like "Family dinner at Mom's." So blessed. Friends online flooded her posts with hearts and comments. I was tagged, of course, the proud mother-in-law, in her little performance. It would have been easy to believe her, and for a while I did. I told myself it was sweet that she was learning how to care for family. But small things began to feel off. Natalie didn't just take pictures of the dinner table. She took pictures of everything: the hallway, the study, even the cabinet where I kept important documents. "Your house has such character," she'd say, zooming in on my husband's old watch or the bookshelf with our photo albums. Once, I caught her standing near my desk, her phone angled toward my tax folder. She smiled when she noticed me watching, pretending to take a picture of the window light. It unsettled me, but I brushed it aside. I'd been taught not to assume the worst about family. Then came the questions, soft, casual, but strange. She asked about my pension, about how my investments worked, about the house's insurance. I laughed awkwardly, saying, "You sound like my accountant." She laughed too, but her eyes didn't. One afternoon, while we were washing dishes, she asked it, the kind of question that freezes the air around you. "If anything happens to you." "Mom," she said lightly, "who gets the house?" The plate in my hand slipped a little, clinking against the sink. I turned to her, forcing a small smile. Well, I said, after a pause, I suppose that depends on what anything means. She giggled as if it were a joke, but something behind her laughter felt too rehearsed, too careful. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window watching the pine trees sway in the wind, her voice replaying in my mind. Who gets the house? It wasn't just curiosity, it was calculation. Still, I told myself not to be cynical. Maybe she was just careless with words, young and unaware of how such things sound to someone my age. Women like me, widows in their 60s, are told to stay gracious, to see the good in people. So I kept quiet, convincing myself she was only clumsy, not greedy. But deep down, a quiet instinct stirred the one that whispers before danger arrives. At first, it felt heartwarming. Natalie had started to act like the daughter-in-law every mother dreams of. She began dropping by with flowers, fresh lilies, daisies, sometimes lavender from the farmer's market. Just to make your living room smell nice, Mom, she'd say, smiling sweetly. She offered to sweep the porch, reorganize the pantry, even wash the curtains. Every Sunday, dinner became a photo opportunity. She'd arrange the dishes, light a few candles, then take dozens of pictures before anyone could eat. Later that night, I'd see them online with captions like, Sunday Love with Mom Turner. Family means everything. Neighbors praised her. My friends at church said I was lucky. I smiled and nodded, telling myself maybe I was. But there was something about her that never fully relaxed. Too polished, too rehearsed, like a woman acting out the role of perfect daughter-in-law for an audience I couldn't see. Then came the little things that made me uneasy. Natalie didn't just take pictures of dinners. She took pictures of my house, every corner of it. Once, I caught her snapping a photo of my study, where I keep my late husband's files and tax records. The light looks amazing in here, she said quickly, pretending to admire the view out the window. I brushed it off, but a seed of doubt began to grow. Over the following weeks, her questions changed tone. Mom, do you still get a pension from the Postal Service? Is your investment account through a bank or a private firm? She always smiled when she asked, making it sound casual, but there was a sharpness beneath that charm. And then one afternoon, as we were washing dishes together, she said it. If anything happens to you, Mom, who gets the house? The question came so lightly, so smoothly, I almost thought I misheard her. The dish slipped from my hand, clinking against the sink. I turned to her, forcing a smile. That's a strange question, sweetheart. She laughed, waving her hand. Oh, I didn't mean it like that. Just curious, planning for the future. I laughed too, though it sounded hollow. Later that night, while the house was quiet, I couldn't stop hearing that sentence in my head. It wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. Still, I told myself not to judge. Maybe she was just young, awkward about money, unaware how words like that sting a woman my age. In American families, especially for women past 60, talk about inheritance always feels like a shadow, a quiet reminder that love can sometimes hide greed. But I chose to silence that instinct. I told myself she was clumsy, not cunning, loving, not greedy, because believing that was easier than facing the truth. When my old friends invited me to join them for a 2-week retreat on the Oregon coast, I hesitated at first. I hadn't been away from home overnight in years, not since my husband passed. The thought of leaving the garden, the koi pond, and my little poodle behind made me uneasy, but Natalie was quick to speak up. Mom, you should go, she said warmly, resting a hand on my arm. You've earned it. I'll stay here and take care of everything. Water the plants, feed the fish, walk the dog. You won't have to worry about a thing. Mason smiled from across the table. Yeah, Mom. Let her get used to the house a bit more. It'll be good for her and for the baby, too. His tone was casual, affectionate, the way sons talk when they think they're reassuring their mothers. I felt a small wave of warmth wash over me. Maybe they were finally trying to build a real connection. That night, I sat at my kitchen desk with a cup of chamomile tea, and wrote out every instruction carefully, just as I used to do when training new staff at the post office. Feed the koi twice a day. Half a scoop of pellets only. Keep the back door locked. Spare key in the blue jar by the window. I even labeled the garden tools with sticky notes so she wouldn't have to ask. It felt good to trust someone again, to believe that kindness was finally being returned. The morning I left, Natalie hugged me at the front gate, her perfume sharp and sweet. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll treat this house like it's my own," she promised. I smiled, touched by her words, unaware of the irony hiding inside them. Driving toward the coast, I remember glancing in the rearview mirror, watching the house shrink into the distance. The lavender swayed in the breeze, the sun lit up the roof, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I told myself it was healthy to let go, to let the younger generation step in. What I didn't know was that while I was packing sun hats and books, Natalie was packing intentions. The moment I handed her those keys, she had already decided what to do with them. To her, my trust wasn't a gift, it was an opportunity. Looking back now, I realized the trap had been set long before I drove away. It wasn't just about watering plants or feeding pets. It was about control. And I foolishly had just opened the door. For the first few days, everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Every morning when I checked the home security app from my hotel room, I saw Natalie moving around the house just as I had hoped, feeding the poodle, watering the lavender, opening the curtains to let the Oregon sunlight spill across the floorboards. It almost warmed me to tears. The house looked alive again, not lonely. Each night around 9, my phone would buzz with a message from her. "Everything's fine, Mom." She'd write, always attaching a cheerful picture: the poodle sitting by the window, the koi pond shimmering at dusk, or the garden drenched in evening light. The words were so simple, so warm, that I couldn't help smiling. For once, I thought maybe I had been wrong to doubt her. Maybe Natalie really did care. On the third evening, she even sent a short video. In it, she walked through the living room, humming softly, placing a vase of tulips on the table I loved so much. The gesture looked natural, affectionate, but something about it made my stomach tighten. The way she moved, confident, casual, wasn't the way a guest moves. It was the way an owner does. At first, I brushed the thought aside. I told myself it was silly to overthink. She was helping me after all. Still, each time I watched the camera feed, a strange unease settled deeper in my chest. She seemed too comfortable wandering into rooms I hadn't mentioned, rearranging things slightly, leaving lights on in spaces I rarely used. Once, I noticed she was wearing my late husband's old cardigan while watering the plants. "It's chilly," she texted when I asked, adding a smiley face. I told myself it was harmless. The house itself looked calm, serene even. Everything was in place. The dog was fed, the garden thrived, the fish glided peacefully in the pond. Yet the silence of it all felt unnatural, too smooth, too quiet. It was the kind of peace that comes before a storm, the kind that fools you into thinking you're safe. I remember standing on the balcony of the beach house, the waves crashing softly in the distance, phone in hand, staring at one of her photos. She was sitting in my living room, smiling, her feet tucked comfortably on my rug. Something about the image made me shiver. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment trust began to crack. Not with noise or drama, but with quiet precision, like glass under slow pressure. On the third night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of the ocean outside my hotel window was gentle, steady, almost hypnotic. I reached for my phone, thinking I'd check on my poodle through the pet activity app just to ease my mind before bed. But as soon as I opened it, a burst of noise filled the room. Music, laughter, and the unmistakable pop of a champagne cork. For a moment, I froze, not understanding what I was hearing. Then I switched over to the Ring camera feed. The screen came alive with color, flashing pink and blue lights, balloons tied to the staircase, people moving through my living room with drinks in hand. My dining table, the one where my husband and I had shared Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years, was covered in confetti and cupcakes. Someone had draped a banner across the wall, "It's a boy." And there, where my wedding photo had hung for decades, was a glittering backdrop of blue letters. My husband's face, his smile, the memory of our life together, all shoved aside to make room for a party I hadn't even known about. My stomach tightened as I leaned closer to the screen. The camera caught Natalie twirling in a pink dress, her hand resting proudly on her belly. Friends I didn't recognize clapped and cheered, while someone shouted, "To the mom-to-be." Champagne sprayed over my rug, over my husband's old armchair. The dog barked from his crate, ignored. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. A gender reveal party. In my house. Without me. In American families, that kind of celebration is deeply personal, something intimate meant for close relatives. Grandparents, parents, siblings. To be left out was one thing, but to have it hosted inside my own home without permission was something else entirely. It wasn't just thoughtless, it was cruel. I felt my pulse quicken, a strange mix of disbelief and humiliation. My hands trembled as I held the phone, trying to steady the screen. The laughter coming from the speakers was sharp and bright, echoing in the quiet hotel room like a slap. I stared at the people crowding my living room, clinking glasses under the glow of colored lights, celebrating as if I didn't exist. I could almost smell the champagne, almost feel the sticky sugar of the frosting melting into my tablecloth. In that moment, something inside me cracked, the kind of break that doesn't make a sound but changes everything. I had trusted her with my home, my memories, my peace. And now all of it was being trampled beneath their celebration. The sound hit me before the image did. I was sitting in bed, halfway through a cup of lukewarm tea, when the notification from my home camera popped up. Motion detected kitchen. I tapped the screen, expecting to see Natalie cleaning or maybe making tea. Instead, I heard her voice, bright and cruel, in a way I'd never heard before. "I've been waiting forever for her to finally go on that trip," she said, laughing lightly. "That old woman is only good for signing checks. This house is going to be mine soon anyway." The words hung in the air like smoke. Her tone wasn't joking. It was confident, venomous. Then came another sound, her mother's voice, low and approving. "Well, sweetheart, you're smart to think ahead. You can't let people like her hold on to everything forever." Laughter followed. More voices joined in the clinking of glasses, the echo of heels against my kitchen tiles. That same kitchen where I'd cooked every Sunday dinner, where I'd taught my son to read bills, where my husband used to hum while making coffee. Now it was filled with strangers and with betrayal. I felt my chest tighten, a physical ache, sharp and deep. I replayed the clip again and again as if repetition could dull the sting. But it didn't. Each time I heard her voice, that mix of greed and mockery, it cut deeper. She wasn't just ungrateful. She was planning, calculating. The law in the United States is clear. A homeowner's surveillance footage recorded within their own property is valid evidence in any future dispute involving trespass or ownership. I knew that I'd installed those cameras myself years ago after a break-in scare in the neighborhood. Never did I imagine they'd capture something like this. I stared at the phone, the little red recording light blinking in the corner of the screen. Proof. Real, undeniable proof. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow. The woman I had trusted, welcomed, defended, had mocked me in my own kitchen, in the house my husband built with his bare hands. Every word she said was a knife carving out what little warmth I had left for her. Outside, the waves crashed against the Oregon shore. Inside, on that tiny screen, my world cracked. In that moment, I understood something. Every older woman fears that betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from the people you once called family. On the screen, the scene unfolded like a cruel parody of celebration. Natalie's mother stood in my kitchen holding a glass of champagne high. To the new family, she cheered, her voice loud and proud. The people around her, friends of Natalie, faces I had never seen before, laughed and toasted as confetti floated through the air. My dining room, once filled with Sunday prayers and quiet dinners, now pulsed with cheap music and shallow laughter. I leaned closer to the screen, searching for one familiar gesture, one sign that someone might remember whose house they were standing in. But there was nothing. No one mentioned my name. No one called me Grandma. No one even acknowledged that I existed. They were talking about the baby, of course, our little boy, our family's future, how lucky Natalie is. But every word drew a line that excluded me. My chest tightened as I realized it wasn't just about the party or the mess. It was about erasure. I wasn't part of their story anymore. I had been quietly deleted like a photograph torn from the frame. For American women my age, family isn't just blood. It's legacy. Respect continuity. To be ignored, to be treated as a burden instead of a foundation, is a humiliation too deep to put into words. Watching those strangers drink and laugh inside my house, I felt something colder than anger. It was the sting of being replaced. The camera caught every detail. Natalie smiling as she cut a cake shaped like a baby bottle. Her mother's hand resting possessively on her shoulder. Mason standing off to the side, smiling faintly, but saying nothing. My son, my only child, had let them take over, not just the house, but the narrative of his own family. I whispered into the silence of the hotel room, "They've erased me." In that instant, the betrayal became more than personal. It became symbolic. They didn't just want my money or my house. They wanted to remove me from Mason's life entirely, to rewrite the story so it began with them and ended without me. The realization hit like a cold wave. They weren't after inheritance. They were after identity. And that was something I couldn't let happen, not while I was still alive to witness it. I stared at the flickering screen one last time before closing the laptop. The image of Natalie's mother raising her glass burned in my mind. It wasn't just a toast. It was a declaration that I, Emma Turner, had been replaced in my own home. I didn't call. I didn't shout. I didn't even cry. I just sat there in the dim hotel light watching the screen go dark after the final clip ended. The laughter from the recording still echoed faintly in my head, but I refused to replay it again. I had seen enough. My hands were steady now, my breathing even. The anger that had burned in me an hour ago had cooled into something colder, sharper, a kind of silence that carried purpose. I downloaded every file one by one, carefully labeling each clip with the exact date and time. The house, the party, the toast, the insults. I stored them in 3 separate folders, cloud drive backup, a quiet ritual of protection. My face, reflected in the laptop screen, looked pale but strangely focused. This wasn't the face of a victim anymore. It was the face of a woman who had just woken up. In American culture, people think silence means surrender, especially for older women. But women like me, widowed, independent, underestimated, we know silence is strategy. It's the moment before action, when emotion turns into evidence, when pain becomes a plan. The younger ones call it calculated calm. I call it survival. I reached for my notebook, the same one I used to keep grocery lists and utility notes, and turned to a clean page. The pen didn't hesitate. My handwriting was slow but certain. "I need a lawyer," I wrote. Then after a pause, "I don't need an apology." Those words steadied me. They drew a line between what had been done to me and what I would do next. This wasn't about rage anymore. It was about dignity. About taking back control, the only way that still mattered, through truth and the law. I closed the notebook and looked back at the laptop, its black screen reflecting my outline. My face seemed older, thinner under the harsh light, but my eyes were different now. No more confusion, no more disbelief. Just quiet determination. The sound of the ocean outside the window filled the silence steady and rhythmic. I could almost hear it breathing with me, patient, powerful, inevitable. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. I reached out and pressed the laptop lid shut. The reflection faded, but the resolve remained. Somewhere deep inside, I knew the real storm hadn't started yet. But when it did, it would not be me who trembled. The next video was worse than anything I'd seen before. The footage began with the front door swinging open and Natalie's mother walking in like she owned the place. Behind her came a group of people carrying bottles of champagne and trays of food, laughing loudly as if they were entering a party hall, not someone else's home. My home. Then came the dog's two big golden retrievers, unleashed and uncontrollable. They stormed through the living room, barking wildly, scattering pillows and knocking over a vase I'd brought back from a trip to New Mexico. My little poodle, terrified, darted across the floor, trying to hide under the table. One of the dogs lunged at him, and I flinched instinctively, even though I was miles away, watching through a screen. The camera caught everything: the chaos, the barking, the laughter. Outside in the garden I had tended for decades, I saw something that made my chest ache. The dogs trampled straight through the rose bushes. Roses my husband had planted 30 years ago, the last thing he ever worked on before he passed. Their red petals scattered like drops of blood against the grass. I gripped the edge of the table, whispering to myself, "Not the roses. Please, not the roses." Inside, the destruction continued. Someone opened a champagne bottle, and the foam sprayed across my antique sofa, soaking into the fabric I had protected for years. Another guest tossed a handful of cake frosting against the wall, leaving pink streaks across the white paint. Natalie clapped and laughed, shouting something I couldn't make out over the noise. It wasn't just a party anymore, it was an invasion. In American culture, respect for elders isn't just manners, it's moral law. You don't desecrate the home of someone who trusted you. You don't turn memories into entertainment. Yet that's exactly what they were doing, dancing, drinking, and destroying the place that held everything I had left of my husband. I stared at the screen, my breath coming shallow. Each frame felt like another layer of dignity stripped away. This wasn't simply carelessness, it was a message. They weren't celebrating life. They were erasing mine. The noise, the mess, the laughter, it all blurred together into something grotesque, something that didn't belong in that quiet Oregon home. What I was seeing wasn't just damage to furniture or flowers. It was the final insult to memory itself. By the time the video ended, my hand was trembling over the mouse. I didn't cry. I couldn't. The pain had gone past tears, turning into something heavier, sharper, a clarity that hurt to hold. I whispered to the empty room, "This isn't just disrespect. This is theft." And I knew in that moment, I wasn't watching a family anymore. I was watching a crime. The next clip began innocently, a group of children laughing, balloons floating through the air, the glow of blue and pink lights still flashing from the "It's a Boy" banner. But then something small and white streaked across the camera's view, a rubber ball. It hit the glass of my aquarium with a hollow thud, and before I could even process what I was seeing, the tank cracked. A burst of water spilled over the wooden cabinet, gushing across the floor. The camera zoomed slightly as the chaos unfolded. My koi, the same ones I'd cared for years, flopped helplessly on the tiles, their scales glimmering under the neon lights. One of the children squealed with delight, clapping as if it were a game. "Do it again," another shouted. And then from somewhere off screen, a woman's voice rang out casual and dismissive. "It's just fish, honey." Those words, careless cutting, echoed through the speakers like a slap. I froze, unable to breathe for a moment. Just fish. To her, they were decorations. To me, they were lives, small, beautiful, fragile lives that had shared my mornings and quiet evenings. I'd fed them, named them, spoken to them when the house felt too empty. Watching them gasp for air, their bodies twitching in panic, I felt something inside me break. The camera caught Natalie walking into frame, her pink dress catching the light. She saw the mess, the puddles, the shattered glass, the dying fish, and instead of rushing to fix it, she laughed, a soft, careless laugh. Someone handed her a towel, not to save the fish, but to wipe champagne from the counter. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. It wasn't just cruelty, it was indifference, a kind of moral rot that eats through the soul, and Natalie didn't even flinch. The koi had been my husband's gift to me after his retirement, a symbol of peace and endurance. Every morning, I'd watched them swim in circles, steady and graceful. They were part of him, of us. And now they lay dying, crushed under the weight of other people's thoughtlessness. In that moment, something shifted. I realized this wasn't just a party gone wrong or a simple lack of respect. It was something darker. If they could destroy what I loved so easily, so thoughtlessly, then they could destroy me too. The clip ended with the camera slowly tilting, showing water pooling under the furniture. The laughter continued in the background, distant and cruel. I sat there trembling, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was awakening. The next recording came from the small camera I'd installed in the bedroom, the one I rarely checked because it was mostly pointed toward the dresser and the window. That night, however, the motion alert flashed again. When I clicked to open the feed, I saw Natalie. She wasn't supposed to be in that room. She moved quietly, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds, her movements quick and practiced. The soft yellow light from the bedside lamp cast her shadow across the wall as she opened the top drawer of my dresser. I watched her pull out folders, one by one, insurance papers, bank letters, old envelopes, neatly labeled in my handwriting. She wasn't curious. She was searching. My breath caught when she crouched beside the small black safe near the floor, the one that held my investment records, my husband's pension documents, and our life insurance policy. I had never told anyone where it was, not even Mason. Natalie placed her ear close to the lock and turned the knob, slightly testing it, like she had done this before. The camera caught every detail, the concentration on her face, the faint smirk when the safe didn't open. Then she reached for her phone. Her voice was low but clear through the microphone. "She keeps everything in the small black safe," she whispered. "Maybe she's hiding money." Those words froze me. It was no longer carelessness, it was intent. Under Oregon state law, what I was seeing on my screen was no longer just bad behavior. It was a crime, unlawful entry, and attempted theft. Even without breaking locks or windows, entering a private room and tampering with property you don't own is enough to press charges. I knew that because I had read about similar cases in the local news. The footage showed her hanging up the call, standing for a moment, then taking a few photos of the documents with her phone before carefully placing them back in the drawer, as if tidiness could erase guilt. I sat there staring at the video, my pulse echoing in my ears. The realization struck hard. This was never about helping me or even about the baby. It was about taking what I had built piece by piece while pretending to care. For so long, I had convinced myself that Natalie was just young, careless, and perhaps a little greedy. But now the illusion was gone. What I saw wasn't family. It was premeditation. I clicked download and saved the video to my evidence folder. My reflection in the laptop screen looked steady, colder than before. I whispered to myself, "She crossed the line." And for the first time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. The message came late, just as I thought the night couldn't hurt me anymore. I had closed my laptop and was staring blankly at the ceiling when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made me sit up straight. Pauline Reed. Pauline and I had known each other for over 30 years. She used to come by every Thanksgiving with her famous pecan pie back when our kids were little. We'd lost touch after my husband passed, though I knew she had become the HR director at the company where Mason worked. For a moment, I thought she was just checking in. Maybe she'd seen my name online somewhere. But the message wasn't friendly. It was short, careful, almost hesitant. Emma, I think you should know Mason's been borrowing from co-workers. Crypto betting. He's in serious debt. I stared at the words, reading them again and again, hoping I'd misunderstood. Borrowing, betting Mason. My Mason, the polite, responsible boy who used to help me balance the checkbook when he was 12. I felt the air leave my lungs. The phone trembled in my hand. Pauline sent another message before I could respond. I didn't want to get involved, but people are starting to talk. He's been asking for money, promising to pay it back after a big win. Please be careful. The words hit harder than anything Natalie had done. Because this wasn't just about greed or disrespect anymore, this was about loss. A different kind of betrayal. Crypto, betting, debt. They sounded like foreign words to me, the language of people who gamble with both money and morality. I had always been proud that Mason was steady, that he'd grown into a man who valued honesty. But now it felt like that version of him had already disappeared quietly, while I was too busy believing in him. I sank into the chair, the phone still glowing in my hand. The images from earlier, Natalie laughing in my kitchen. The roses trampled the fish. Gasping for air suddenly blurred together with Pauline's words. It was all connected now. The lies, the entitlement, the sudden expenses. My son wasn't just married to a greedy woman. He had become part of the greed. The ache that spread through me wasn't sharp like anger. It was deep, dull, and final. Like watching a light fade that you can't turn back on. I typed a reply, "Thank you, Pauline. I needed to know," and put the phone down slowly. My reflection in the dark window looked older than I remembered. I whispered to the silence, "I haven't lost my house yet, but I've already lost my son." When I finally dialed Mason's number, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely press the call button. The line rang twice before his voice came through, familiar but colder than I remembered. "Hey, Mom," he said, distracted, as if I'd interrupted something important. I tried to steady my tone. "Mason," I began quietly, "I just received a message from Pauline Reed. She said you've been borrowing money from co-workers. Something about crypto and betting. Is that true?" There was a long pause followed by a heavy sigh. Then his voice snapped like a whip. "Mom, you're overreacting. You don't understand how money works these days." I froze, the words echoing in my ear. Overreacting. The boy who once cried when he broke my vase now sounded like a stranger scolding an inconvenience. I started, but he cut me off. "Stop interfering in our lives. You always make everything dramatic. Natalie and I are fine. Just stay out of it." The line went quiet. I could hear his breath, quick, irritated, before the soft click of disconnection. I sat there in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear, even after the call ended. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The quiet of the hotel room wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not with sound, but with finality. A clean break. In America, there's no heartbreak quite like the one an older mother feels when her grown child treats her as a burden. We spend decades giving time, money, love, forgiveness, only to wake up one day and realize the giving has become invisible. What's left isn't anger. It's grief wrapped in dignity. I lowered the phone, staring at my reflection in the window. My eyes looked tired but clear. The tremor in my hands had stopped. Inside that stillness, something else had taken shape, not despair, but clarity. He was my son, yes. But the person speaking on the phone was no longer the boy I had raised. The Mason I loved was gone, consumed by pride, debt, and the woman who knew exactly how to pull his strings. I whispered into the quiet, "I've lost my son." Then after a beat, my voice steadied. "But I will not lose myself." I picked up my notebook, turning to a clean page beneath my earlier note about the lawyer. This time, I didn't write with trembling hands. The pen glided smoothly across the paper. Step 1, protect the house. Step 2, freeze all joint accounts. Outside, the wind rustled through the pine trees. I looked up, my reflection merging with the night beyond the glass. For the first time, I didn't see weakness staring back at me. I saw resolve. The storm had arrived, and I was ready for it. I sat very still for a long time after the call ended. The pain was still there, but it had changed shape, sharper now, cleaner like glass after it breaks. I placed the phone on the table, folded my trembling hands together, and whispered to myself, "Don't act in anger. Act in clarity." That single sentence steadied me. It was something my late husband used to say whenever life threw chaos our way. "Never fight with emotion, Emma," he would remind me. "Fight with evidence." I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and began my quiet work. One by one, I downloaded every video file from the security system, the living room, kitchen, garden, bedroom. Each clip landed in a new folder on my desktop, labeled House Footage, Confidential. My movements were deliberate, methodical. The grief that once paralyzed me was now fuel for precision. I plugged in a portable hard drive, copied the files, then made another backup on a USB stick. Finally, I uploaded everything to a secure cloud folder under a private name only I would remember. Nothing could be lost now. When the last file finished saving, I opened a fresh document and began to catalog everything: timestamps, people, incidents. Natalie Pierce, unlawful entry and destruction of property, I typed carefully. Verbal evidence of intent to obtain financial assets. Recorded proof of trespass by external guests. Each line looked less like the notes of a heartbroken woman and more like the report of an investigator. My years at the post office handling paperwork, checking details down to the decimal, had come back to me. This wasn't grief anymore. It was procedure. Outside, the wind brushed against the hotel window, carrying the faint scent of rain. I didn't look up. My focus was complete. I paused only once to open my legal folder and reread a line I had printed years ago under U.S. law. All footage recorded on privately owned property is the legal possession of the homeowner and may be submitted as evidence in civil or criminal proceedings. That sentence felt like armor. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the list I had made. Every file, every timestamp, every action was now locked safely under my control. What Natalie had seen as carelessness, a harmless security camera, had become the most powerful weapon in my hands. I didn't smile, but my eyes sharpened. The woman who once cried silently in her living room was gone. What remained was a strategist, calm, meticulous, and ready. The storm that had shattered my trust had also forged my resolve. And as I closed the laptop, the reflection in the dark screen no longer looked like a victim. It looked like someone preparing for war, the kind fought not with rage, but with evidence. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The air outside was still gray and cold, but inside me something had shifted. I wasn't the frightened woman from yesterday anymore. I was clear, calm, and ready to act. I sat down with my notebook, reviewed Charles's advice one more time, and began my first task, taking back control of my finances. I called the Wells Fargo customer service line and asked to speak directly with the branch manager. My voice didn't shake once. "This is Emma Turner," I said. "I need to remove all joint access from my personal accounts, effective immediately. No one, including my son Mason Turner, should have any access online or otherwise. The woman on the other end hesitated, then asked for verification. I provided my ID, social security number, and security phrases without missing a beat. Within 20 minutes, my accounts were updated. Every joint permission revoked. Every connection severed. When the banker confirmed the change, I felt something powerful. Not anger, not revenge, but relief. Quiet, dignified relief. Next, I moved to my digital safety. I changed every password, my email, the investment platform, and the security camera system at home. I enabled two-factor authentication on each one using my new number and private backup email. No one would ever log into my systems again without my knowing. As I typed the new passwords, I remembered how easily I used to share things, a Wi-Fi code here, a spare key there. I thought it was love. It was trust. But now I understood trust without boundaries is just an open door for betrayal. By mid-afternoon, I made one last call to Locksmith Express, a local locksmith service. I need all locks replaced today, I told them firmly. Within an hour, a young man arrived with a toolkit and polite eyes. He worked quietly while I stood by the window watching the pine trees sway outside. When he handed me the new set of keys, their metallic weight in my hand felt like a symbol of closure, of freedom, of beginning again. No one else had copies now. No one could walk in uninvited or claim that house as theirs. When he left, I locked the door behind him, turned the key twice, and stood in the silence that followed. It wasn't the silence of loneliness anymore. It was the silence of ownership, of control. For the first time in weeks, I felt whole. My world was small again, but it was mine. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The air outside my hotel window was heavy with Oregon fog, but inside my mind was clear. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and stared at my phone for a long moment before finding the name I needed, Charles Brenner. Charles had been my late husband's attorney, a steady, trustworthy man who helped us prepare our will 5 years ago. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral, but I remembered what he told me that day. A good plan today can prevent a disaster tomorrow. When he answered, I took a deep breath. Charles, this is Emma Turner. I need your help. I told him everything, the party, the damage, the video of Natalie opening my drawers, and the recordings of her laughing in my home as if it were hers. I even mentioned Mason and how cold he had sounded on the phone. I didn't cry this time. My voice was calm, almost detached. He listened quietly, then spoke with his usual calm authority. Emma, you did the right thing by saving those videos, but don't confront them yet. Let's build your defense first. At his request, I uploaded all the recordings into a secure folder and shared the link. An hour later, he called me back. Here's what we'll do, he said. We'll transfer your property into a living trust. That means no one, not even Mason or Natalie, can claim ownership or inheritance without your permission. And if anything happens to you, the house won't go into probate. I wrote every word down in my notebook. Then I asked softly, what about my pets? I'll add a pet clause, he explained. It's common for seniors who live alone. It ensures your animals are cared for, and it prevents anyone from using them to access your assets. It happens more often than you think. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I had spent years trusting people who didn't deserve it. Now I was learning to trust the law instead. Next, Charles continued. Separate your finances. Open a new account under the trust's name. Move your money quietly. Tell no one, not even Mason. Let them think everything's normal. When the call ended, I sat for a while listening to the rain tapping gently on the window. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel afraid. I felt prepared. I opened my notebook again and wrote carefully. Step 3, living trust. Step 4, protect the animals. Step 5, silence until ready. My coffee had gone cold, but the warmth was somewhere else now inside me. I had always believed that silence was a sign of surrender. But that week, I learned something different. Silence, when used wisely, could be the sharpest weapon of all. After securing my finances and my home, I turned my attention to what Charles had called the foundation of defense evidence. From that moment on, I began documenting everything carefully, like a woman knitting her own shield thread by thread. Each day, I opened my notebook and recorded every interaction from afar, every message Mason sent, every transfer notice, every careless word Natalie posted on social media. I took screenshots, saved bank notifications, even printed out emails. Piece by piece, I was building a timeline not out of revenge, but for protection. A legal story told in facts, not emotion. When I told Charles about my plan, he agreed immediately and said, "It's time we bring in a professional." He introduced me to Martin Hale, a private investigator with a background in financial crimes. His voice on the phone was calm, efficient. "I've handled similar cases before, Mrs. Turner," he said. "Leave the digging to me." For a week, I heard nothing, only the quiet hum of routine. I watered my lavender, took short walks, pretended life was normal, but inside I was waiting. Then one evening my email chimed with a new message from Martin. The subject line read simply, "Preliminary report, Turner case." My pulse quickened as I opened the file. Page after page, there it was, a map of betrayal, laid out in black and white. Mason had taken online loans under the label home inheritance collateral. He had used my house, my sanctuary, as part of a fabricated authorization form. I felt my stomach drop. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. But then the shock gave way to something colder: focus. Because this time, I wasn't powerless. I had proof. I called Charles immediately. His tone was grave but steady. "Emma, this gives you full leverage. What he did constitutes fraud and elder exploitation. In Oregon, that's a felony. If we push forward, both Mason and Natalie could face criminal charges." I sat in silence, gripping the printed pages. The weight of them felt heavier than stone. These were no longer just papers, they were justice waiting. That night, I locked the report in my drawer, next to my husband's old fountain pen. I whispered softly, "You'd be proud of me, John. I'm not the woman they thought I was." For the first time, I realized that revenge wasn't about rage. It was about reclaiming truth, one quiet, deliberate move at a time. The morning I decided to return home, I woke up before dawn. The hotel room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the heater and the soft rustle of pine trees outside the window. I sat up, poured myself a cup of tea, and stared at my phone. For days, I had gathered evidence, spoken with lawyers, secured my house, and exposed the truth piece by piece. Now it was time for the next move: a warning. Not a threat, not anger. A message of awareness, calm, deliberate, and sharp enough to make them think twice. I opened my messages, found Mason's name, and typed slowly. "You should remember, son. I always know everything that happens inside my house." I read it twice before pressing send. There was nothing more to add, no accusation, no explanation, just truth served cold. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the screen blinked, message delivered. I set the phone down beside my teacup and waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then a new notification appeared. It wasn't from Mason, but from Natalie. A single typing bubble flashed on and off before disappearing. Then another appeared. Then silence. I imagined her panic, her rushing to Mason, asking what I knew, what I had seen. I could almost hear her voice trembling. And Mason, my son, sitting there in silence, realizing that the woman he had underestimated was not broken, only quiet. I didn't need a reply. Their fear was enough. I leaned back, watching the first rays of sunlight creep through the mist. The steam from my tea rose slowly, curling in the pale light. For the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt powerful. I smiled, not out of joy, but understanding. Every seasoned woman knows there's a moment when pain turns into wisdom. That moment had come for me. The game had changed, and this time I knew the rules, the law, the evidence, the timing. I whispered to myself, they thought they could use me, but they've forgotten experience always outlasts youth. As the sky turned gold over the Oregon hills, I picked up my notebook and drew a single line under the last entry. Step 6. The warning has been sent. I closed the notebook, feeling its weight in my hands. The next chapter would not be about loss or betrayal anymore. It would be about justice, quiet, lawful, and unstoppable. The game had begun, and I was holding the law in my hands. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the world felt quieter than it should have been. The house stood there, my house, but something in its silence had changed. It no longer felt like home. It felt like a stranger wearing my memories. The lavender scent that used to greet me from the garden was gone. The air was thick with something else, the stale sweetness of old champagne, faint traces of perfume that wasn't mine. I unlocked the door slowly, and the hinges groaned like they hadn't been oiled in years. The first thing I noticed was the carpet. Once soft beige, now covered with faint brown stains and glitter from some forgotten party. The walls bore small smudges of color, probably where the balloons had been taped. My living room, once a sanctuary of quiet mornings and soft music, looked like a battlefield after a celebration that had no right to happen. I took another step, my shoes pressing against crumbs that crunched faintly underfoot. The vase that had belonged to my mother sat crooked on the mantel, its porcelain cracked at the base. I felt my throat tighten. Then I heard a small whimper from the hallway. My heart jumped. Oliver, I called softly. My little poodle came running toward me, tail wagging weakly. His fur was matted and there was a small scratch on his neck. I knelt down and gathered him in my arms, feeling the trembling in his tiny body. "It's okay, baby," I whispered. "Mom's home now." For a long moment, I just held him, the weight of him grounding me. The sound of his small breathing steadied something inside me. But when I looked around again, the anger returned, slow, cold, and deliberate. This wasn't just carelessness. It was disrespect, a declaration that my boundaries, my peace, my ownership meant nothing. I stood up, walked to the center of the living room, and looked around like a soldier surveying the aftermath of battle. The enemy had been here, and this time I wasn't going to pretend it was a misunderstanding. I took off my gloves, placed my suitcase by the door, and whispered under my breath, "All right, Natalie, you wanted a home to conquer. Let's see how well you handle a war." The house was silent again, except for the faint ticking of the old clock, the one my husband had restored years ago. Each tick sounded like a countdown. I had come back, not to reclaim the past, but to face it. I didn't have to wait long. Within minutes of unlocking the door, I heard tires screeching outside and hurried footsteps on the porch. Then the front door opened, and there they were, Mason and Natalie, wearing the kind of smiles that never reach the eyes. "Mom," Natalie exclaimed, too loud, too bright. "We missed you so much." Her arms spread as if to hug me, but I didn't move. I simply stood there, one hand resting on my suitcase, the other still holding the leash of my trembling poodle. Their smiles faltered for half a second, just enough for me to see it. The unease, the guilt. "I see," I said softly, my voice even. "The house looks different." Mason scratched the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "We tried to keep it clean, Mom. Maybe, some dust settled in while you were gone." I walked past them, my heels clicking slowly on the hardwood floor, and looked around the stains, the crooked vase, the faint smell of alcohol. I turned back to face them. "Tell me," I asked calmly, "did anyone come here while I was away?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Natalie froze for a split second, then clutched her belly dramatically. "Oh, I don't feel well," she murmured. "The baby. Maybe I should go to the hospital." It was a poor performance, too rehearsed, too convenient. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Mason's face went pale. He looked at her, waiting for direction like a lost child. My heart twisted for a moment, not from pity, but from recognition. My son wasn't evil. He was weak. And weakness, when paired with greed, could destroy a family faster than hatred ever could. I took a slow breath, forcing calm into my tone. "Go if you must, Natalie," I said quietly. "But remember, lies can't be cured by doctors." Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing, but she said nothing. Mason's hands fidgeted at his sides, guilt painting every line of his face. I looked at them both, the two people who had turned my trust into a playground for their ambition. For a long moment, I said nothing, just let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then very softly I added, "Even your lies are careless." Natalie blinked, speechless. Mason looked down. The room went still again, the kind of silence that announces a storm before it breaks. I could feel the air shifting. This was no longer a homecoming. It was the first move in a game they didn't know I'd already mastered. I had been waiting for this moment, not out of rage, but out of necessity. The kind of quiet confrontation where the truth would speak louder than I ever could. Without saying a word, I walked to the living room shelf, took out my laptop, and connected it to the television screen. Mason and Natalie watched me confused. I could feel their eyes following every movement, but I didn't rush. Calmness had become my armor. When the screen lit up, I opened the folder labeled House Footage, Confidential. The first clip began to play, the one from the kitchen camera. At first, there was only laughter. Then came the voice. Natalie's voice. "Mùi già khó tính đó, chỉ hợp để ký xét thôi." She had said it in English, with that mocking tone burned into my memory. That old witch is only good for signing checks. The words cut through the air like a blade. The room went still. Mason froze, the color draining from his face. Natalie's hand flew to her mouth as if she could pull the words back, but it was too late. Her voice echoed again from the speakers, followed by laughter, her laughter. I didn't move. I let the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Then I turned to face them. Mason looked like a ghost. "Mom, she didn't mean," Natalie interrupted, tears streaming instantly. "It's my hormones, Mom. I wasn't myself. Pregnancy makes people say things they don't mean." She placed both hands on her belly as if it were a shield. For a moment, I simply studied her. The trembling lips, the forced innocence, the desperation. Once upon a time, I might have pitied her. Not anymore. I spoke softly, but every word was deliberate, sharp as glass. "Don't use that child as a shield for your ingratitude." The words landed between us like a verdict. Natalie's crying stopped. Mason's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I turned back to the screen, paused the video, and closed the laptop with a quiet click. "What's recorded?" I said evenly, "can't be undone." The truth doesn't need my voice, it already spoke for me. Neither of them answered. Natalie's tears had dried, leaving her face blank. Mason looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years, fear. Not of punishment, but of realization. I picked up my cup of tea, took a small sip, and looked at them both. My tone was calm, almost gentle. "You thought I was blind, but I only closed my eyes to see who would betray me first." And with that, I stood, leaving the silence to settle cold, heavy, and final. Mason was the first to break the silence. His voice shook, fragile and pleading. "Mom, please." She didn't mean it. Natalie she said things she didn't think through. I turned my gaze toward him, calm but unflinching. I didn't have to raise my voice. The look alone was enough to stop him mid-sentence. For years, that same gaze had been one of affection, of patience, of forgiveness. Now it was a mirror, forcing him to face what he had become. Without a word, I reached into my bag and pulled out a small silver USB. It gleamed faintly under the light as I placed it on the table between us. The sound it made, that soft tap of metal against wood, echoed louder than any argument. "In here," I said evenly, "is everything you need to remember what you've done. And before you think of deleting it, a copy already sits safely in the hands of my attorney, Mr. Brenner." Their expressions froze. Mason blinked rapidly, his lips parting, but no sound coming out. Natalie, on the other hand, looked as if someone had pulled the ground out from under her. She sank into the nearest chair, her body slumping, her face drained of all color. The mask of sweetness she had worn for months was gone. No more fake smiles, no more trembling sympathy, just raw, unmistakable fear. Her hands moved to her lap, trembling as she whispered, You wouldn't go that far, would you?" I looked at her not with hatred, but with the kind of clarity that comes after pain has burned itself out. "You went that far first," I replied softly. Mason finally stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Mom, please. We can fix this. We can." "Fix," I interrupted quietly. "You don't fix betrayal, Mason. You learn from it if you're lucky." He froze, his mouth still open, but no words followed. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on the wall. I stood there, watching them both crumble under the weight of their own lies. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to cry, to explain, or to forgive. That was the strange thing about truth. Once it surfaced, it didn't need defending. It simply existed, heavy and undeniable. I took my teacup from the counter, lifted it to my lips, and said quietly, "I don't need your apologies. I already have the truth." Natalie looked away. Mason lowered his head, and I realized in that stillness that fear was the only language liars understood. For years I had been the one trembling. Today it was their turn. I stood up slowly. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, with all the words that had already been said and the ones that would never need to be. My hands were steady, my heart quiet. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't shake. It was calm, measured, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "From this moment on," I said clearly, "neither of you will have a key to my house." The sentence hung in the air like a gavel. Mason's eyes widened. Natalie's lips parted, but neither dared to move. I reached into my coat pocket, took out a small key ring, and placed it on the table beside the untouched teacups. The sound of metal against wood was soft, but final. "I've changed all the locks," I continued. "This home is mine. It always has been." Then I straightened my back and turned toward the door. Every step I took was deliberate, each one shedding a little more of the fear I'd carried for months. My shoes clicked against the floorboards, a quiet, steady rhythm that felt like freedom. When I reached the doorway, I paused. Something in me needed to say one last thing, not out of anger, but out of truth. I turned to Mason. He stood there pale and still, his shoulders hunched like a child waiting to be scolded. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, gentle, kind, too easily swayed by the world around him, and that made it hurt even more. "Mason," I said softly, "if there's still an ounce of dignity left in you, learn how to be a man. Don't let a woman drag you into sin." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Natalie's face was expressionless, now drained of color, as if every mask she had ever worn had crumbled. I didn't wait for a reply. Some goodbyes are better left unsaid. I opened the door, and the cold Oregon air met me like an old friend, sharp, honest, cleansing. I stepped outside, lifted my chin, and let the door close behind me. The soft click of the latch sounded like a verdict. Behind that door, silence swallowed them both. Ahead of me, the evening light stretched across the street, pale gold and forgiving. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like someone's mother or victim or widow. I felt like myself, whole, dignified, and free. Sometimes the loudest way to reclaim your honor is not through shouting, but by walking away and letting the silence do the talking. It happened faster than I expected. 1 week after I left that house, the silence I had chosen began to speak for me louder than any courtroom ever could. I was sitting in my garden that morning pruning lavender and enjoying the peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim when my phone started buzzing nonstop. At first, I ignored it. Then a message from my neighbor Linda appeared. "Emma, have you seen this? It's all over the Oregon Neighbors Connect group." Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the link, and there it was. My own kitchen, my own living room, balloons, champagne, laughter, and Natalie's voice sharp and cruel. "That old witch is only good for signing checks." Someone had uploaded the security footage, the same files I had entrusted to Charles Brenner for safekeeping. He must have sent a backup to one of his legal associates for record keeping, and somehow it found its way online. The title read, "Gender Reveal in Mother-in-Law's House Without Permission." The comments section was a storm. "Unbelievable. Who does that to their own family? That poor woman, she deserves better." Hundreds of replies poured in, each one echoing the outrage that had once burned quietly in my chest. What had been private humiliation was now public reckoning. Within hours, Natalie's name began trending locally. Someone dug up her workplace. Others shared screenshots, and soon the label appeared, "Elder Exploiter." In American culture, that word carries a special kind of shame. It's not just an insult, it's a moral sentence. To be called an abuser of the elderly is to lose every ounce of respect. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. The truth was doing its own work. Later that day, Linda stopped by. She stood by the gate, almost whispering, "Emma, everyone saw it. You don't have to say a word. People know now." I nodded, feeling neither triumph nor guilt. Just balance, the quiet kind that arrives when the scales finally even out. That evening I heard from Charles. He apologized for the leak, but I told him not to worry. Sometimes, I said, karma doesn't need a judge. It just needs witnesses. By nightfall, Natalie's mother, a woman once known for her pride at church events, had stopped showing up altogether. Linda told me the congregation was whispering that people crossed the street to avoid her. I looked out my window at the fading sunset, the light spilling across my lavender beds. For the first time, justice didn't feel loud or vengeful. It felt natural, inevitable. Karma has a way of moving quietly. It doesn't knock, it doesn't warn. It simply arrives dressed in consequence. A few days after the video went viral, I received a call from Linda again. Her voice was trembling with that mix of shock and disbelief that always follows poetic justice. "Emma," she said, "someone just posted that Natalie got suspended from her job." I didn't say anything at first. I only listened as she explained how it happened. Apparently, one of Natalie's co-workers at the supermarket had seen the viral clip, the balloons, the laughter, the insult. The person had sent the video anonymously to the HR department with a simple note attached. "Do you trust someone like this, handling customers' money?" That one line was enough. In America, where reputation often speaks louder than any resume, those words carried weight. Within 3 days, the store's management opened an internal investigation. They reviewed the footage, verified the connection, and then issued a formal suspension under the reason ethical misconduct. Natalie tried to defend herself, claiming it was a misunderstanding, a private family issue. But the company wasn't interested in excuses. To them, it wasn't about family drama, it was about trust, and she had already lost it. I later learned that other stores in the same chain quietly circulated her name through internal channels. They didn't need to say much, just a few whispers, a few forwarded emails, and every door began to close. By the end of the week, Natalie was unemployed. She started sending out job applications around the area, even to smaller shops and local diners. But each time the answer was the same: "We'll call you back." They never did. Her mother, embarrassed beyond words, stopped attending Sunday service. And Mason, poor Mason, spent his days trying to reassure a wife who had built her life on pretense and now couldn't understand why the world no longer believed her act. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Watching the world restore its own balance was enough. Karma, I realized, doesn't always need a judge or a courtroom. Sometimes it's just an email sent at the right moment, or a stranger who decides they've seen enough cruelty for one lifetime. And as I sat by my window sipping tea, I thought justice had a strange kind of rhythm. Slow, patient, and always, always right on time. I didn't plan his downfall. I only handed the truth to the right hands, and the rest unfolded by itself. While Natalie was struggling to explain her suspension, the storm found Mason next. His company received an anonymous report, though I knew exactly where it came from. Mr. Brenner's private investigator had sent it quietly through an encrypted address, enough to trigger an internal audit without leaving a trace. At first, Mason thought it was a misunderstanding. He even joked with a coworker. Someone must have hacked my email. But when the audit department summoned him, the jokes stopped. They had everything: screenshots of company emails used for online gambling accounts, records of crypto transactions linked to his office computer, and evidence of personal borrowing from colleagues. In the United States, that isn't just unprofessional. It's a violation of corporate ethics, a red flag for financial misconduct. The meeting lasted less than an hour. Mason walked out pale, clutching a single envelope termination without compensation. His health insurance, his retirement contributions, his benefits gone overnight. I didn't hear it from him. Pauline, my old friend and his manager, called me first. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Emma," she said, "we had to let him go. I wanted you to know before it hits the record." I thanked her quietly and hung up. Then I sat for a long time staring out the window at the lavender field swaying in the wind. I should have felt satisfaction, maybe even triumph. But all I felt was a strange mix of sorrow and justice, the kind that doesn't sting, just settles. That evening, Mason came by. He didn't knock right away. I saw his reflection in the glass door, thinner, hunched, broken. When he finally entered, he couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he said softly, "they fired me." His voice cracked halfway through. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I just thought I could fix everything before anyone noticed." I looked at him, the same man who once told me I was too old-fashioned to understand modern finance. And now here he was, stripped of everything he thought made him powerful. "Sometimes," I said gently, "the lesson isn't about losing money. It's about remembering what was never for sale." He nodded, silent tears falling, his pride dissolving into something almost human again. Later, I learned he found part-time work at a gas station nearby. No office, no tie, no false pride, just long hours and quiet repentance. Karma didn't destroy him. It just brought him back down to the ground where humility finally had space to grow. I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. Life had started doing the work for me. Within a month, both of them, Mason and Natalie, lost everything that held their lives together. Without their jobs, without steady income, the world they'd built on appearances began to crumble piece by piece. It started with a letter. The landlord of their rented apartment sent a notice: unpaid rent for 2 months, contract terminated. I heard about it from Linda, who had seen the moving truck parked in front of their building. "They're packing in a hurry," she said quietly. They had nowhere respectable left to go. Every friend had quietly distanced themselves, and Natalie's mother, terrified of gossip in her church group, refused to let them stay. "I can't risk people talking," she reportedly said. The same woman who once bragged about her daughter's perfect life. So they ended up in a roadside motel, one of those dimly lit places near the highway where the carpets smell of dust and air freshener, and the walls are thin enough for you to hear strangers arguing in the next room. Through a friend who passed by the area, I later learned Natalie spent her evenings sitting by the window, staring at the glowing neon sign outside, the one that flickered. No vacancy. Her hands rested on her growing belly, her eyes hollow and distant. That image haunted me for a moment, but not out of pity. It felt poetic, the kind of justice that life writes in silence. The woman who had once thrown a party in my house surrounded by balloons and laughter now sat under a cheap, flickering light, her future as uncertain as that sign outside. Mason, meanwhile, had stopped answering calls. The debt collectors were circling the bank accounts empty, and his pride, the same pride that once made him call me old-fashioned, was gone. Linda saw him one evening at a gas station, wiping windshields for a few dollars an hour. He didn't see me, she said. He looked smaller somehow. I imagined the two of them in that motel room, the silence between them heavy, filled with the echoes of every lie they'd told. There was no shouting now, no more pretending, no more audience. Just the wreckage left behind when greed burns too long. I didn't gloat. I simply let out a long breath, feeling the quiet settle around me. The truth didn't destroy them. Their choices did. And as for that neon sign, "No vacancy," I couldn't help but think it was the universe's message, written in electric red. Their world was full, no room left for lies. Peace didn't come with noise. It arrived one morning quiet as sunlight on my kitchen floor. When the dust finally settled, I decided to start over, not with anger, but with order. I called a professional cleaning and restoration team. For 2 full days, they worked from dawn until dusk. The smell of fresh paint replaced the old scent of champagne and regret. The sofa was reupholstered, the walls restored to their soft cream tone, and the carpet, once stained by carelessness, now looked new again. Outside, I replanted my rose garden. The soil was rough from neglect, but my hands still remembered how to care for living things. Petal by petal color returned to my yard. Red, white, soft, pink, little proofs that life always finds a way to bloom again. Next came my poodle, my loyal companion through it all. I took him to the pet wellness clinic for a full checkup. The vet smiled and said, "He's doing great. Strong little guy." I laughed softly, realizing how much that sentence applied to me too. Strong little lady, still standing. Days turned into weeks, and the quiet of my house began to sound like music. Morning coffee, the creak of wooden floors, the distant hum of the radio. Small, ordinary things that had once been overshadowed by chaos now felt sacred. Sometimes neighbors stopped by the gate, curious, yet gentle. Emma, they'd ask, "Aren't you sad that your son isn't around anymore?" I'd smile, not out of bitterness, but peace. "I still love him," I'd say, "but I love peace more." It wasn't a cruel answer. It was simply the truth. Love, I'd learned, doesn't mean letting people destroy you. Sometimes it means stepping away so everyone can see the damage they've caused. That evening, as the sun sank low, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea in hand. The new rose garden glowed under the soft golden light. My poodle lay at my feet, snoring softly. For a long time, I just watched the light move across the petals, each one reflecting calm instead of chaos. No courtroom, no shouting, no revenge. Just quiet justice, the kind that comes when the world finally sets itself right. Karma had done its work. All I had to do was live. If you've ever been used or betrayed by the people you once called family, I want you to remember this: your story matters. Speak it. Don't bury it. Because dignity, like lavender, grows back when you care for it quietly, patiently, but unyielding. I took a deep breath, let the air fill my chest, and said to no one in particular, or maybe to every woman who'd ever been silenced, wisdom and dignity never grow old. And as the sun dipped lower behind the hills, I smiled again, knowing that peace, the real kind, had finally come home.